Here, it's a stop button. I've pressed record, so it's going now. All you need to do is press the red button when you're done. Okay. Thank you.
How are we gonna know?
You'll know. No, well, class.
Oh,
class.
class
is over.
That sounded really sinister.
Alright. Is he just leaving us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is everybody satisfied with
But
their
we're
hair
being
and
And
everything now?
I'd like a haircut.
Yeah, that's why I'm wearing this hood, thanks.
Doesn't
It's a little tough.
Do you guys want to scooch in? So
Then I can get away from the weird substance that's on that table.
Didn't we come to a general?
Jesse.
What?
Hey, I just meant like, yeah.
No, well, I just
Closer
want to
to
be
me.
over here so that we can see.
More even.
Am I in the shot? Hi. Okay.
Just wanna be the head of the
That
table,
definitely
don't you?
confirmed whether you were in or
Yeah, exactly. The feedback that I got from saying hello.
Okay.
Is that what we're saying?
Anyway.
Thank you.
Good job.
Didn't we come to a general consensus of what we wanted our first topic to be?
Oh yeah.
I
Right.
think Shira
Yes.
asked, is jurisdiction constitutional? Right?
Is
Does it have?
judicial review.
Is judicial.
Yeah, that's what I
Yes.
meant.
Okay, so topic number one,
Slice the feet.
the constitutionality of judicial review. So just to start off, how many of us think it is constitutional?
I don't know.
Oh, It's what- in the oh, middle.
Judicial review.
How many people
Yes.
really feel one way or the other, like absolutely it is explicitly said, and how many people are like, how did he
It's a
get
good
there?
question.
I need to hear arguments.
Do you have to? So
Okay, I'm
is
just trying to like figure out.
so is somebody who's saying it is constitutional? Are they on the line of it has to be explicit, or could they
No,
say
no.
it's implicit?
Yeah, it can be implicit. Is that how you feel?
I don't feel it's either.
Okay, do you want
Yeah.
to talk about why?
Yeah, well, I think, basically I think that there's just not really, and I'll try to find the actual document with the constitutional section we have, but I just don't see it as being in the Constitution. I think the conundrum that Marbury brings up, that this is the conundrum justices face, is realistic, and I think that's a real problem of, what if you have to choose between state law or a federal law and what the Constitution says, and that is a real problem, but he uses that as the crux of his argument, saying that he has judicial review, and I don't find that compelling. And then you could say, well, it's obvious that it was meant to be in there because it's in the Federalist Papers that they have that power. But like I said before, if it's not expressly stated, it does not matter what the intention of the authors was. It matters what everyone understands it to be, who's signed under that compact.
Right.
And that's my thinking.
Okay.
I didn't get the
Cool.
Federalist Papers.
Yeah, I want to hear about it.
Because they said something
I
about
think about the intent on that point. I generally do disagree with that. However, the point could be made that because so often we do argue about what was the intent of the law being made when interpreting laws. I would say it's not wholly irrelevant, just because that's actually just a point that is brought up when interpreting things. So I think generally the interesting thing about the importance of knowing how the people interpret it is oftentimes the people want to know what the original intent was. So the Federalist Papers do obviously provide as much insight as possible to that. But I do agree that the explicit wording is more important, but I don't think you should completely discount intent.
So do you think the Federalist Papers do support judicial review? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Can I ask one more question and then other people can take it? So do you think then that means that the Constitution provides for judicial review, for the judiciary branch to have judicial review?
I think he's saying no.
Oh.
I think he's saying no, right?
No, I was just trying to articulate that, the potential importance of intent, that's all.
You're saying that if you're saying no, you can argue that the explicit wording of the Constitution doesn't
Yeah, yes, but if you're arguing yes on the basis of the intent of the authors, then I'm saying that's not such a, that's not such a terrible reason, even though I don't usually ascribe to that, just because oftentimes when interpreting law, people do focus on intent. That's a pretty standard practice, and in this particular case, the Federalist Papers do articulate what the intent was. So all I'm saying is, even if, regardless of whether I agree or disagree with that, that's not a moot point. As far as interpreting law goes.
I think there was a lot of good insight in having the Federalist Papers, because the point of Federalist Papers was to promote the Constitution to the other states, to get them to sign. So this, if anything, is just a further explanation of what they intended to write. So I think in this case, the Federalist Papers should be taken in pretty high regard. As it would have been much better if it was said explicitly in the Constitution. I think that still would take precedent over anything the Federalist Papers say. But for this specific scenario, I think it takes pretty high, high influence there.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
I'm curious if there's a reason it wasn't included explicitly. For instance, I don't know if there's any evidence whatsoever of this, but it may be this was a kind of compromise to not include explicitly because the Anti-Federalists were so vehemently opposed to this. Maybe by not including that, they would get some Anti-Federalists on both sides.
I'm also
that's really
wondering.
cool.
I'm also wondering if you think that it being in the Federalist Papers is could go then to say that it is in the Constitution, then why did Marshall himself never reference the Federalist Papers? He never uses it as reasoning.
I don't think we're saying that it's in the Constitution. I don't know the answer to that, and I actually think that, while I agree with Marshall that it's constitutional, his argument could be so much more legitimate if he referenced this. Because, I don't know about you guys, but, I didn't know that it said this in here until he showed this to us, and I feel like I already had formed an opinion on Marshall's ruling before I saw this, and then this, validated it even more. What did you guys think? Did you know that this existed in this format before you made your opinion on Marshall's ruling? Because we did that a while ago, and then we saw this.
I just don't think you can use the Federalist Papers to help you decide what the Constitution is saying unless the Federalist Papers were part of the Constitution. Because no matter what you say you're going to say in your final paper or Constitution, the point is, it says something, and that's the final product. So you can't say, well, even though you had this one interpretation of my final product, what I meant to say was this, which I said I was going to say in my rough draft.
Before we saw the Federalist Papers, and I agree that obviously if it's not written in the Constitution, there's some problem there. But before we saw the Federalist Papers, I took a kind of weak position that judicial review was legal because, well, initially I was thinking about Marshall's idea of two conflicting laws. One's the Constitution, one was made by Congress. Which one takes precedent? And off of that, what if judicial review wasn't a thing and nothing was limiting the creation of laws, the Constitution could just be overwritten. In that sense.
What do you
Can you
mean
say that
overwritten?
differently?
If let's say the Constitution says, I can't just pick out a thing in the Constitution. I'm going to make something up. The Constitution says that states can exist, and then Congress made a law that says states can't exist. And there was no stingy judicial review to say that the congressional law is unconstitutional. Where's overriding the Constitution?
Right. I think it's a practical conundrum, but and I think Marshall points that out. But I don't think. But even so, I still don't think that goes to say that the Constitution provides for judicial review specifically to the judiciary branch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to support that further, I think there's a difference between what is, the fact of the matter slash what is true versus what makes sense. And so things might exist even if they don't really make sense, or yeah, I mean, I can really articulate that as well as I want to, but it's like, it's just like what Zach was saying, like it could make sense, and it could be practical to institute judicial review, but the question is there in the Constitution?
Okay. Now,
Yeah, that was unnecessary to say that.
Well,
I loved it.
just to like pose this question, I know we've like gotten into this a little bit, and I think it's really interesting. Like,